The wind moves first. Long before any human sound, before the faint crunch of boots in snow or the distant echo of a climber's breath, the wind arrives quietly across the high ridges. It slips over the edges of the world, gliding across peaks that rise far above the clouds, carrying with it a stillness that feels almost untouched by time. At these heights, the earth feels different. The air is thinner, softer, almost fragile. Each breath is lighter than the one before it, as though something essential has been gently removed. Sound travels differently here. It fades more quickly, dissolving into the vast openness that stretches in every direction. There are no cities, no distant hum of traffic, no signs of the restless movement that defines life below. Only space, only silence, only sky. High above sea level, where mountains push into the atmosphere itself, the world begins to slow down. Not just in movement, but in feeling. Time stretches, moments linger. The usual rhythm of life softens into something quieter, something calmer. Clouds drift beneath these peaks like slow-moving rivers. From above, they no longer feel distant or unreachable. They become part of the landscape, flowing gently between valleys, wrapping themselves around jagged ridges, and dissolving into the morning light. Some mountains rise beyond even these clouds. In places like Mount Everest and Annapurna, the peaks reach heights where the air holds less than a third of the oxygen found at sea level. Yet despite this, life still finds a way to exist here, quietly, slowly, adapting to conditions that seem, at first glance, impossible. But this is not a story about danger. This is a journey into calm. A journey into a world where everything unnecessary falls away, leaving only the essentials: breath, movement, and the quiet awareness of being present in a place few will ever truly experience. Imagine standing on a narrow ridge as the sun begins to rise. The sky shifts from deep blue to soft gold. Light spreads slowly across the horizon, touching the highest peaks first before descending into the valleys below. Shadows stretch long and thin, creating patterns across the snow that change with every passing minute. There is no rush here, no urgency, just the steady rhythm of nature, unfolding exactly as it has for thousands of years. Far below, the world continues at its usual pace, busy, loud, and full of motion. But up here above the clouds, that world feels distant, almost unreal. What remains is something quieter, something simpler. The sound of wind moving across rock, the slow drift of clouds beneath your feet, the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing. And in that stillness, something begins to change. The mind, so often filled with noise and distraction, starts to settle. Thoughts become slower, softer, less urgent. The constant pull of time begins to loosen, replaced by a gentle awareness of the present moment. This is the quiet power of the mountains, not in their height or their scale, but in the way they invite stillness, in the way they create space, both around you and within you. Because above the clouds, life is not measured in minutes or hours. It is measured in moments. Moments of calm. Moments of clarity. Moments where nothing is required and nothing is missing. As the light continues to rise, the mountains reveal themselves fully. Endless ridges stretching into the distance. Peaks layered one behind another, fatting gradually into the horizon. Snow catching the sunlight and reflecting it back into the sky, creating a brightness that feels both gentle and infinite. This is a world few people see, and even fewer truly understand. But for those who spend time here, whether for a day, a journey, or simply through quiet observation, there is something unmistakable about it. A sense that, in this place, the world has slowed down just enough to be felt again. to be seen, to be experienced in a way that is often forgotten below. And so the journey begins. Not with urgency, but with calm. Not with noise, but with silence. A slow, steady movement into the world above the clouds. Chapter 1, where the air begins to chain. The transition happens gradually. There is no single moment when the world shifts from familiar to something entirely different. Instead, it unfolds step by step, almost unnoticed at first. A slight change in the air, a subtle difference in how the body feels, a quiet awareness that each breath carries just a little less than before. At lower elevations, the air is full and rich. Oxygen flows easily into the lungs, supporting every movement without effort. Walking feels natural. Breathing is automatic, something that rarely demands attention. But as the path begins to rise, something begins to shift. The change is gentle at first. A slightly deeper breath, a small pause between steps. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent. Just a quiet adjustment as the body begins to respond to its surroundings. Mountains like Denali and the towering ranges of the Himalayas extend far beyond what most environments demand of the human body. They reach into regions where the atmosphere itself becomes thinner, stretching further apart, holding less oxygen with every increase in altitude. By the time you reach 3,000 meters, the difference is noticeable. Not overwhelming, but present. The air feels lighter. Movement becomes more deliberate. The body begins to conserve energy in subtle ways, slowing the pace, deepening each breath, becoming more aware of its own limits. And yet, there is something calming about this change. Because with it comes a natural slowing. A shift away from speed and urgency towards something more measured, more intentional. Each step matters a little more. Each breath becomes something you notice. And in that awareness, the mind begins to quiet. The landscape changes as well. Forests begin to thin, giving way to open slopes and scattered rock. The sounds of wildlife grow less frequent, replaced by the steady movement of wind across the terrain. Streams become colder, clearer, fed by distant glaciers that move slowly through the mountains over time. Above 4,000 meters, the world becomes even quieter. The air now holds significantly less oxygen than at sea level. For many, this is where the body begins to feel the change more clearly. Breathing deepens. Rest becomes more important. Movement slows not by choice, but by necessity. And yet, despite these changes, there is no sense of struggle here. Only adaptation. The human body is remarkably capable of adjusting when given time. Over days and weeks, it begins to produce more red blood cells, improving its ability to carry oxygen. Breathing patterns shift naturally, becoming deeper and more efficient. The heart adjusts its rhythm, supporting the body in ways that feel almost effortless. It is not a fight against the mountain. It is a quiet process of becoming part of it. And as this adaptation continues, something else begins to happen. The mind grows quieter still. With fewer distractions, fewer external demands, attention turns inward. The simple act of walking becomes enough. The rhythm of steps, the steady inhale and exhale, the feeling of air moving in and out of the body, these become the focus. There is no need to rush. No need to think too far ahead. Only the present moment remains. Clouds drift lower now, sometimes rising to meet the path itself. There are moments when visibility softens, when the edges of the world blur gently into white. In these moments, distance becomes difficult to measure. Sound becomes softer, absorbed by the surrounding mist. It feels like stepping into a different world. A quieter one. A slower one. And as the path continues upward, this feeling deepens. Not as something overwhelming, but as something peaceful. Something steady. Something that invites you to move not faster, but more gently. More aware. More present. Because here, where the air begins to change, the world begins to change with it. And in that change, something else begins to emerge. A sense of calm that feels almost impossible to find anywhere else. Chapter 2, the quiet rhythm of high places. There is a rhythm to the mountains. Not the kind measured by clocks or schedules, but something quieter, something slower. A rhythm shaped by wind, light, and the steady movement of the earth itself. It begins with the morning. Long before the sun fully rises, the sky starts to shift. A faint glow appears along the horizon, soft and gradual, spreading across the peaks in silence. The cold air holds still, as if waiting, and for a moment, everything feels suspended between night and day. Then the light arrives. It touches the highest ridges first, illuminating them in warm tones that contrast gently with the cool blues of the shadows below. Snow reflects the light, bright but soft, never harsh. The mountains seem to wake slowly, revealing their shapes one layer at a time. At this hour, the world is at its quietest. Wind is minimal. Movement is slow. Even the smallest sounds, the shifting of snow, the distant crack of ice, carry clearly through the still air. This is the calmest moment of the day. A time when everything feels balanced. As the sun continues to rise, the temperature begins to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. The cold softens just enough to allow movement to feel easier. Layers of frost begin to melt in places where the light lingers longest. Small streams form, trickling gently across rock before disappearing beneath the surface once again. Clouds begin to move more freely now. They gather in valleys, drift along slopes, and sometimes rise high enough to pass over the peaks themselves. From above, they move like a quiet ocean, steady, fluid, and endlessly changing. And throughout all of this, the mountains remain still, unmoving, unchanged. Their presence constant, grounding the shifting elements around them. As the day progresses, the rhythm continues. Wind picks up slightly, moving across ridges and through narrow passes. It carries with it a soft, continuous sound, not loud, not disruptive, but steady, like a distant breath that never fully fades. Shadows shift as the sun moves across the sky. What was once bright becomes shaded. What was hidden becomes visible. The landscape transforms gradually, revealing new shapes and textures with each passing hour. Time feels different here. Not slower in a way that feels heavy, but slower in a way that feels natural. Unforced. There is no pressure to move quickly. No urgency to reach a destination. Only the steady flow of the day, unfolding exactly as it should. And within this rhythm, something begins to settle. The body finds its pace. The mind finds its quiet. Breathing becomes steady, matching the slow movement of the environment itself. In these high places, above the clouds, life is not about constant motion. It is about presence. About being where you are, without distraction. Without interruption. As the sun begins to lower toward the horizon, the light softens once again. Colors deepen. Shadows grow longer. The temperature begins to drop, returning gradually to the stillness of the night. And with it, the rhythm completes its cycle. Not with an end, but with a continuation. Because in the mountains, the rhythm never truly stops. It simply begins again. Chapter 3, Walking Through the Cloud Layer. There comes a point on the mountain when the path no longer leads above the clouds, but into them. From a distance, clouds appear soft and distant, drifting far below the peaks like a separate world. But as the elevation increases, the distance between ground and sky begins to close. The horizon fades, the edges of the landscape soften, and gradually, almost without noticing, the path enters the clouds themselves. Visibility changes first. What was once clear and expansive becomes gentle and diffused. Shapes lose their sharpness. Mountains that once stood bold against the sky now appear as quiet silhouettes, emerging and disappearing through layers of white. The air feels different here. Cooler, slightly damp. It carries a softness that settles over everything: the ground, the rocks, even the sound of footsteps. Every movement becomes quieter, absorbed into the surrounding mist. Walking through this space feels like stepping into something suspended between worlds. There is no clear boundary between above and below, between sky and earth. Only a continuous, shifting layer of cloud that moves slowly around you, sometimes opening to reveal glimpses of the landscape, then closing again just as gently. In regions like the slopes leading toward Mount Everest, this transition can happen over the course of a few hundred meters. One moment, the path is open and clear. The next, it disappears into a soft, white horizon where distance becomes impossible to judge. And yet, there is no sense of being lost here. Only a sense of quiet immersion. Sound behaves differently inside the clouds. Wind softens. Echoes fade quickly. Even distant noises seem closer, yet more muted. It creates an environment where the smallest sounds, the shifting of fabric, the rhythm of breathing, the gentle crunch of snow underfoot, become more noticeable. It is not silence, but something close to it. A kind of stillness that surrounds rather than empties. As the path continues upward, the cloud layer begins to thin. Light filters through from above, growing brighter with each step. The sky, once hidden, begins to return in fragments, patches of blue appearing through the white, expanding gradually as the elevation increases. And then, almost suddenly, the path emerges. Above the clouds. What was once surrounding you now lies below, stretching endlessly across the valleys. From this perspective, the clouds no longer feel like an obstacle or a boundary. They become part of the landscape itself, a vast, moving surface that reflects the light of the sky. It is a quiet transformation. Not dramatic, not overwhelming. Just a gentle shift in perspective. Standing above the clouds, the world feels wider, more open. The horizon extends further, uninterrupted by the details of the land below. Peaks rise through the cloud layer like islands, each one separated by distance, yet connected through the shared stillness of the sky. Moments like this invite stillness, not because they demand it, but because they make it natural. There is nothing to rush toward, nothing to hold on to. Only the simple experience of being present in a place where the world has softened into something calm and expansive. And as the clouds continue their slow movement beneath your feet, the journey carries on, quietly, steadily, without urgency. Chapter 4, where the air grows thin. Beyond a certain height, the change in the air becomes impossible to ignore. It does not arrive suddenly. There is no clear line that marks the moment when breathing becomes different. Instead, it unfolds gradually, step by step, until the body begins to recognize that something fundamental has shifted. Each breath carries less. Less oxygen, less density, less of what the body relies on without ever needing to think about it. At elevations above 5,000 meters, this difference becomes more noticeable. Breathing deepens, movement slows. The natural rhythm of the body begins to adjust, responding quietly to the environment around it. In ranges like the Himalayas, where peaks extend far beyond this height, the air continues to thin with each step upward. By the time the path reaches 7,000 meters, the atmosphere holds significantly less oxygen than it does at sea level. And yet, even here, the experience is not one of struggle. It is one of awareness. The body becomes more present. Breathing, once automatic, becomes something you notice. Each inhale feels more deliberate. Each exhale carries a quiet sense of completion, as though the body is gently recalibrating with every cycle. Movement slows naturally, not out of weakness, but out of balance. The body begins to choose efficiency over speed, conserving energy in ways that feel instinctive rather than forced. Steps become smaller. Pauses become more frequent. The rhythm of walking aligns itself with the rhythm of breathing, creating a steady, continuous flow. There is a calm in this adjustment, a quiet understanding between the body and the environment. No resistance, no urgency, only adaptation. At these heights, the landscape reflects the same simplicity. Vegetation becomes scarce, giving way to rock, snow, and open sky. The terrain feels more exposed, more direct. There are fewer layers between the surface of the earth and the atmosphere above. It creates a sense of openness that is both vast and grounding. Sound continues to soften. The thin air carries less vibration, allowing even strong winds to feel less overwhelming. Instead of sharp, sudden noise, there is a steady presence, a continuous movement that surrounds without interrupting. And within this environment, the mind continues to quiet. With fewer distractions and a slower pace, attention settles naturally into the present moment. Thoughts become less scattered. Focus becomes softer, yet clearer. There is no need to think far ahead. No need to look back. Only the next step. Only the next breath. Clouds remain far below now, forming a distant layer that separates this high, open world from everything beneath it. The sky above feels closer, deeper, more expansive. Light moves differently here, more direct, casting subtle shadows that shift with the passing of time. And as the elevation continues to rise, the experience becomes even more refined, more minimal, more still. Not because something is being taken away, but because what remains is enough. Enough to move. Enough to breathe. Enough to simply exist within the quiet rhythm of the mountains. Chapter 5. The Stillness of Snow and Ice. In the highest regions of the mountains, the landscape becomes simpler. Not empty, but refined. Colors reduce to a quiet palette of white, soft gray, and the occasional deep blue of distant shadows. Texture becomes more subtle. Movement becomes slower. The world, in many ways, feels as though it has been gently quieted. Snow covers the ground in smooth, continuous layers. In some places, it appears untouched, stretching across the terrain without interruption. In others, it reveals patterns shaped by wind, soft ridges and gentle curves that shift over time, forming and reforming with each passing hour. Walking across this surface carries a distinct rhythm. Each step presses lightly into the snow, creating a soft, muffled sound that fades almost instantly. There is no echo, no sharp impact, only a quiet imprint that remains briefly before blending back into the landscape. The stillness here is different. Deeper, more complete. Even in the presence of wind, the environment feels calm. Snow absorbs sound, softening everything around it. Conversations, if they occur, remain close, never traveling far. The world becomes more contained, more intimate. In places like Annapurna, where vast snowfields extend across high-altitude terrain, this stillness can stretch for miles. There are no signs of movement beyond the slow shift of clouds and the occasional drift of fine snow carried by the wind. Time feels even more fluid here. Without clear markers of change, moments blend together gently. The position of the sun, the angle of light, the subtle shift in temperature, these become the only indicators of passing time. And even these changes are gradual, unforced. Ice forms in quiet layers beneath the snow. Glaciers move slowly through the mountains, their motion almost imperceptible. Yet over time, they shape the landscape in profound ways, carving valleys, smoothing rock, creating the foundations of the terrain itself. Standing near a glacier, there is a sense of something ancient. Not in a dramatic or overwhelming way, but in a steady, grounded presence. A reminder that these processes have been unfolding for thousands of years, continuing without interruption, without urgency. The air here feels even more still. Colder but not harsh. Clear but not empty. It carries a quiet sharpness that heightens awareness without demanding attention. Breathing remains steady, slow, aligned with the rhythm of movement and rest. There is a kind of balance in this environment, between motion and stillness, between light and shadow, between presence and quiet. And within that balance, there is space. Space for the mind to rest. Space for the body to move without strain. Space to simply exist within the landscape, without needing to change it or move through it quickly. As the light begins to soften once again, the snow reflects the colors of the sky, pale gold, soft blue, gentle shades that shift with the setting sun. Shadows lengthen across the surface, creating depth and contrast that feels both subtle and expansive. And in that quiet transition from day to evening, the mountains return once again to stillness. Not as an absence of movement, but as a presence of calm. A reminder that in the highest places on Earth, simplicity is not a lack of detail. It is a different kind of richness. One that unfolds slowly. One that invites stillness. One that remains long after the moment has passed. Chapter 6. The sound of wind across the ridge. At high altitude, the wind becomes part of the landscape. It is not separate from the mountain. It does not pass through as a visitor. It belongs there, moving across ridgelines and over frozen slopes with a rhythm as old as the peaks themselves. In lower places, wind is often brief. It comes and goes, rising through streets, moving through trees, disappearing behind buildings and hills. But high in the mountains, above the forests and beyond the shelter of valleys, it becomes more constant, more present, more woven into the experience of the place. It arrives softly at first, barely noticeable, brushing across clothing and skin with a light, cool touch. Then it strengthens, not suddenly but steadily, gathering itself as it moves through open spaces. Along narrow ridges, where the land drops away on both sides, the wind can flow with remarkable clarity, uninterrupted for miles. Its sound changes with the terrain. Across fresh snow, it is soft and almost whisper-like, gliding over the surface without friction. Against exposed rock, it deepens slightly, creating a low, steady tone that rises and falls depending on the shape of the slope. Passing through ice formations or across uneven ground, it shifts again, carrying faint textures and subtle variations that make it feel almost like music. Not a melody exactly. Something more elemental. Something spacious. On mountains such as K2 and the higher ridges of the Himalayas, wind speeds can rise dramatically, especially near exposed summits. But from a distance, without urgency or danger, what remains most striking is not the force of the wind. It is its continuity. the way it never fully disappears, the way it fills the silence without breaking it. For those moving through these high places, the wind becomes a kind of companion. It sets the atmosphere of the day. It shapes the feel of the air. It moves the clouds. It traces the contours of the mountain in ways the eye cannot always see, but the body can quietly understand. It carries cold, yes, but it also carries clarity. There is something grounding about hearing wind in a place so open and still. It reminds you that the mountain is alive in its own quiet way, not through sudden movement or dramatic change, but through this constant exchange between air and stone, snow and sky. Sometimes the wind lifts loose snow from the ridge and carries it into the air in long, pale streams. From a distance, these plumes look almost like breath, rising from the mountaintop and dissolving into the blue above. It is one of the most peaceful sights in the mountains, a summit standing still beneath the sky while the wind draws soft white lines from its edge. In moments like these, sound and image become one. The visible movement of snow, the low hush of air across the ridge, the stillness of everything else. And within that combination, the mind begins to settle even further. There is nothing sharp about this sound when heard from a place of calm observation, nothing intrusive. The wind does not demand attention. It offers a background spacious enough for thought to slow down and eventually drift away. Even at night, when the light fades and the cold deepens, the wind remains. It moves across tents, over ridges, through gaps in the rock, continuing its slow conversation with the mountain while the rest of the world sleeps below. And perhaps that is part of what makes the high mountains feel so separate from ordinary life. They are never truly silent, but their sounds belong to a quieter order. Not machines, not voices, not interruption. Only air moving over the roof of the world. Only the sound of distance. Only the steady breath of the mountain itself. Chapter 7, Light Before Sunrise. Before sunrise in the mountains, there is a kind of silence that feels almost complete. It is not simply the absence of noise. It is something more delicate than that. A pause, a suspension, a brief stretch of time when the world seems to be waiting, holding itself still in the dark before the first hint of light returns. The air is at its coldest then. Sharp, clean, and deeply quiet. Snow and ice reflect whatever faint glow remains from the stars, and the slopes appear almost silver in the darkness. The outlines of the mountains are only barely visible, rising against the night sky in great black shapes that feel both distant and immense. Below, valleys remain hidden beneath shadow and cloud. Above, the sky stretches clear and open, often crowded with stars so bright and numerous they seem closer than usual, as if the altitude has narrowed the distance between earth and sky. At these hours, the mountains feel less like land and more like space. Still sparse, endless. Then something changes. Not all at once. Just a subtle shift along the horizon. A faint band of pale color appears first, almost too soft to notice. A cool gray-blue, then a hint of silver, then a fragile line of light that begins to separate the peaks from the darkness behind them. This is the first sign. The day has not yet arrived, but it is approaching. And in the mountains, that approach is one of the most peaceful transitions nature offers. There is no rush to it. No sudden brightness. Light unfolds slowly here, touching the world in stages. The highest peaks receive it first. A distant summit glows faintly while everything below remains dark. Then another peak catches the same soft color. Then another. One by one, the ridgelines begin to emerge, their sharp edges turning from shadow into form. In the Himalayas, this process can feel almost ceremonial. The first warmth of color often appears on the tallest summits long before it reaches the valleys beneath. On clear mornings near peaks like Mount Everest, light can move across the upper snowfields in a gentle wave, gold at first, then brighter, until the whole summit seems to glow above a world still half asleep. The change in color is subtle but remarkable. Deep blue shifts to pale blue. Gray becomes lavender. Snow turns faintly pink, then gold, then white again as the sun rises further. Every surface responds differently. Rock absorbs the light and darkens in contrast. Ice glimmers. Wind-carved snow catches fine shadows that disappear minute by minute. Nothing is abrupt. Everything transitions. And because it happens so slowly, the mind has time to follow it, to notice it, to rest inside it. This is one of the quiet gifts of the mountains. They return attention to small changes, to light moving across snow, to shadow lifting from a slope, to color deepening in the sky. Things that would be missed in a faster place become enough here. As the sun approaches the horizon, the cold remains, but it softens at the edges. The first warmth is not felt on the skin immediately. It is seen first, then gradually sensed. The mountain does not wake all at once. It brightens in pieces. A ridge, a face of ice, a distant cornice catching gold. Then eventually, the valleys begin to open as light pours downward. Clouds below glow from within, shifting from gray to pearl to bright white. What was hidden begins to reveal itself. Depth returns to the world. Distance becomes easier to read. And yet, some of the peace of the dark remains. Morning in the mountains does not erase stillness. It carries it forward. There is no loud beginning to the day. Only light. Only air. Only the slow return of the visible world. For many, sunrise is a moment. In the high mountains, it is a passage. A long, gentle crossing from darkness into clarity. And it may be one of the most calming things the natural world can offer. Not simply the arrival of day, but the way it arrives. Patiently, quietly, without force. As if the earth itself understands, there is no need to hurry. Chapter 8, Valleys Beneath the Sea of Clouds. Far below the high ridges and ice-covered slopes, mountain valleys hold a different kind of calm. They are not as stark as the upper elevations, not as exposed, not as severe in appearance, but they carry their own rhythm, their own stillness, shaped by depth, shelter, and the slow gathering of clouds that settle into them like water in a basin. From above, these valleys often disappear beneath a vast white layer. Cloud fills them overnight and lingers into the morning, creating the impression that the mountains rise from an inland sea. Peaks and ridgelines appear like islands. Lower slopes vanish completely. Forests, rivers, villages, and stone paths are hidden beneath a soft, shifting blanket that moves almost too slowly to notice. This is one of the most peaceful sights in the mountains. To stand above a valley full of cloud is to witness two worlds at once. Above, clear sky and distant summits. Below, silence held in white. The cloud layer is not static. It moves with its own quiet intelligence, flowing around hillsides, curling through narrow openings, thinning and thickening as the temperature changes. In the first light of morning, it catches pale gold from the rising sun and glows gently from within. There is no sharp edge to it, no defined border, just a gradual merging between land, air, and light. In places throughout Nepal, northern India, and the mountain regions of the American West, this phenomenon creates scenes of extraordinary stillness. Valleys disappear beneath cloud, while higher villages or ridges remain in the clear, suspended above the mist as though floating. Trees emerge halfway from the white. Dark slopes appear and vanish. A single peak can stand completely visible while everything around it is hidden. And in those moments, the mountains feel endless. Not because every detail can be seen, but because so much cannot. There is a softness in not seeing everything at once, a kind of mercy in it. The world below becomes simpler when the cloud rises to cover it. Complexity disappears, roads vanish, distances blur. What remains is shape, light, and silence. For a calm documentary, this is the rhythm that matters most. Not constant motion, but slow reveal. Not drama, but atmosphere. Cloud moving through a valley at dawn can hold the eye longer than any sudden event. It changes continuously, yet almost imperceptibly, allowing the mind to drift with it rather than chase it. The sounds in these valleys are softened too. Even when streams run beneath the mist or morning wind moves through the trees, cloud absorbs and diffuses much of what would otherwise travel. If there are bells from grazing animals or the faint call of a distant bird, they arrive muted, as though heard through layers of air and time. Everything feels a little further away, a little gentler. As the day warms, the cloud often begins to lift. Very slowly, the hidden world returns. First the tops of forests, then slopes, then paths, then scattered rooftops. Rivers reveal themselves in pieces, catching light where the mist thins. The valley floor emerges not all at once, but in stages as though being remembered. There is something deeply calming about this process. The world does not announce itself. It appears quietly. And the mountains, once again, become a place of gradual transition rather than sudden change. By late morning, some valleys clear completely. Others hold onto their clouds for much longer, especially where the air remains cool and still. But whether the mist rises or remains, its presence changes how the landscape is felt. It makes the mountains seem larger. The visible world becomes selective, revealing only what matters in that moment. The line of a ridge, the glow of snow, the dark shape of pine above the cloud line. Everything else can wait. And perhaps that is part of why scenes like this are so restful to watch. They do not overwhelm with detail. They allow space. Space for the eyes to rest. Space for thought to slow down. Space for the imagination to complete what the cloud has hidden. In the world below, so much demands full attention all at once. But here, above the valleys filled with cloud, the mountains teach another way of seeing. A quieter way. One where partial view is enough. One where the hidden world remains part of the beauty. One where calm comes not from having everything visible, but from watching the world reveal itself slowly, in its own time. Chapter 9, The Long Movement of Ice. High in the mountains, where snow gathers year after year, something slow and nearly invisible begins to take shape. It does not move in the way rivers do. It does not rush or fall or change direction suddenly. Instead, it builds quietly, layer upon layer, as fresh snow settles over what came before, pressing down over time until it becomes something denser. Something older. Something that remembers seasons long past. This is where glaciers begin. At first, it is simply snow, light, soft, easily disturbed by wind or footsteps. But as the seasons pass, the weight of new snow compresses the layers beneath it. Air pockets shrink. Crystals change. The texture becomes firmer, more connected, until eventually the snow transforms into ice. Not all at once. Gradually. So slowly that no single moment marks the change. And yet, over time, something remarkable happens. The ice begins to move. Not quickly, not in a way that can be seen from one moment to the next, but continuously, quietly. A steady flow shaped by gravity and time, carrying the accumulated weight of years down through valleys and across the slopes of mountains. In places like Annapurna and across the greater Himalayas, glaciers form some of the most enduring features of the landscape. They stretch for miles, following the natural curves of the terrain, filling valleys with ice that moves so slowly it seems almost still. But it is not still. It is always moving. A few centimeters each day. Sometimes less. But always forward. Standing near a glacier, the stillness is unmistakable. There is no immediate sense of motion, no visible shift in position. The surface appears solid, fixed in place. And yet, beneath that calm exterior, the entire body of ice is slowly flowing, reshaping the land over years, decades, and centuries. The sound of a glacier is subtle. There are no constant noises, no steady rush. Instead, there are occasional moments, a distant crack, a soft settling sound, the gentle release of pressure deep within the ice. These sounds are not frequent, but when they occur, they carry a sense of depth, as though something far below the surface has shifted just slightly. Most of the time, however, there is only quiet. Wind passing overhead. Snow drifting lightly across the surface. The distant call of a bird far below. And beneath it all, the silent movement of ice. Glaciers shape the mountains in ways that are both visible and unseen. They carve valleys, smooth rock faces, carry debris across great distances. They create the foundations of rivers that flow far beyond the mountains themselves, supplying water to lands that may never see the ice from which it came. And yet, their presence is not forceful. It is patient. They do not demand attention. They do not change quickly. They simply continue. Day after day. Season after season. Century after century. In a world that often feels fast and immediate, glaciers offer something different. A reminder of time that moves slowly. A reminder that change does not always need to be visible to be real. And perhaps most importantly, a reminder that stillness does not mean absence of motion. It can mean something deeper, something ongoing, something that unfolds quietly, beyond the reach of constant observation. As light shifts across the surface of the ice, shadows form within its textures, soft lines that reveal subtle contours shaped by wind and temperature. Snow gathers in shallow depressions, smoothing the surface even further. The entire landscape feels calm, balanced, and continuous. There is no beginning here, no clear end. Only a long, steady movement that connects the past to the present, and the present to what will come next. And in that continuity, there is a kind of peace. A sense that not everything needs to move quickly to have meaning. That some of the most profound changes happen slowly, quietly, without ever drawing attention to themselves. Chapter 10, Breathing in Thin Air. Breathing is something most people never think about. At lower elevations, it happens automatically, effortlessly. Each inhale brings enough oxygen to support the body without any need for awareness or adjustment. It is constant, reliable, and largely unnoticed. But in the high mountains, this changes. Not suddenly, not in a way that feels alarming, but gradually, quietly, until breathing becomes something you begin to notice again. At elevations above 6,000 meters, the amount of oxygen available in the air is significantly reduced. The atmosphere is still present, still clear, but the distance between oxygen molecules increases. Each breath contains less of what the body needs, even though it feels the same when it enters the lungs. The body responds gently. Breathing becomes deeper, slower, more deliberate. It is not a struggle, it is an adjustment. Each inhale carries a sense of intention, as though the body is simply choosing to pay more attention to something it once handled automatically. The rhythm of breathing aligns itself with movement, creating a steady pattern that supports each step, each pause, each moment of stillness. In regions approaching the highest peaks, such as Mount Everest, this rhythm becomes even more refined. There is no need for urgency, no benefit in rushing. Instead, everything slows naturally to match the conditions of the environment. Walking becomes a sequence of breath and step. Inhale, step, exhale, step, pause, and continue. This pattern is not forced. It emerges on its own. A quiet synchronization between body and mountain. And within this rhythm, something unexpected happens. The mind begins to quiet. With attention drawn to breathing, there is less space for distraction. Thoughts slow down. The constant movement of ideas and concerns begins to settle. Focus narrows gently to the present moment, to the air moving in and out, to the sensation of each step, to the steady pace of progress. There is a calm in this simplicity, a clarity that comes not from effort, but from reduction. Fewer thoughts, fewer demands, just the essential elements of movement and breath. Even when at rest, breathing remains different. Sitting on a ridge, looking out across a sea of clouds, the body continues its quiet adjustment. Inhales are slightly deeper, exhales are slightly longer. There is a natural pause between breaths that feels unforced, almost meditative. The air itself feels lighter, not empty but spacious. It carries a sense of openness that is difficult to describe, something that expands awareness rather than filling it. And yet, despite the reduced oxygen, there is no sense of loss here. Only a shift, a different way of experiencing the same fundamental process. Breathing becomes something to notice again, something to feel, something to follow. In this environment, even small movements carry a quiet significance. Adjusting a glove, shifting weight from one foot to the other, turning slightly to look at the horizon. Each action is supported by the steady rhythm of breath. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is rushed. Everything aligns. And in that alignment, the experience of the mountains becomes even more immersive, more present, more connected. Because here, where the air is thin and the world is quiet, breathing is no longer something that fades into the background. It becomes part of the journey itself, a gentle reminder that life continues, even in the most minimal conditions. A steady rhythm that carries forward, one breath at a time. Chapter 11, The Wide Open Sky. Above the clouds, the sky feels different. It is not just larger. It is deeper, more expansive, in a way that goes beyond simple distance. At lower elevations, the sky often shares space with other elements: trees, buildings, hills, the layered textures of everyday landscapes. It is present, but it is part of a larger scene. In the high mountains, that balance changes. The sky becomes the dominant presence. It stretches uninterrupted from one horizon to the other, meeting the peaks directly, without obstruction. There are no boundaries to contain it, no structures to frame it. It exists fully, surrounding everything with a sense of openness that is both calming and vast. The color shifts with elevation. At higher altitudes, the atmosphere is thinner, scattering light differently. The blue of the sky deepens, becoming richer, more intense. It feels closer, as though the distance between Earth and space has shortened just slightly. Clouds, when they appear at this level, take on new forms. They are no longer distant shapes floating far above. They move through the same space as the peaks, sometimes passing between ridges, sometimes rising from below, sometimes dissolving into the open air. From certain vantage points, especially near summits in ranges like Denali or the higher sections of the Himalayas, the sky and the mountains exist almost as one continuous environment. Stone reaching upward, air extending outward, both meeting without separation. There is a calm in this openness, a sense that nothing is crowded, nothing is confined. The eye can travel as far as it wishes without interruption, following lines of ridges into the distance, then lifting upward into the sky itself. This freedom of view has a quiet effect on the mind. It creates space, not just physically, but mentally. Thoughts feel less constrained. Attention feels less divided. There is room to simply observe without needing to focus on any one detail. Light moves differently across this open space. Without obstacles to block or reflect it, sunlight spreads evenly, creating soft gradients that shift slowly over time. Shadows are longer, more subtle. Colors transition gently rather than sharply. Even during midday, when the sun is high and bright, there is a softness to the light that feels balanced rather than intense. As the day progresses, the sky continues to change. Afternoon brings slight variations in cloud movement, gentle shifts in color, small adjustments in tone that reflect the passage of time without ever feeling abrupt. And then, as evening approaches, the transformation begins again. The deep blue softens. Warm tones return. The horizon glows. And the entire sky becomes part of a slow, quiet transition from day to night. In the mountains, the sky is not just a background. It is part of the experience, a constant presence that shapes how everything else is seen and felt. It holds the light. It carries the clouds. It creates the sense of scale that defines the high places of the world. And above all, it offers space. Endless, open space. The kind that allows the mind to rest. The kind that makes stillness feel natural. The kind that reminds you that not everything needs to be filled. Some things can simply be left open, left quiet, left as they are. Part 5. Chapter 12. The slow descent of evening. As the day begins to soften, the mountains shift once more. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but in a way that feels almost like a gentle exhale. The light that once stretched brightly across ridges and snowfields begins to fade at the edges. Colors deepen. Shadows grow longer. The world, which felt open and expansive under the midday sun, becomes quieter, more intimate. Evening in the mountains does not arrive all at once. It moves slowly, descending across the landscape in layers. The highest peaks hold onto the last light the longest. Their summits glow in warm gold while the slopes below begin to cool into shades of blue and gray. Valleys darken first, filling with shadow as the sun lowers behind distant ridges. Clouds, once bright and reflective, soften into muted tones, drifting gently beneath the fading sky. The air grows colder again, not sharply but steadily. A quiet return to the stillness that defines the higher elevations. There is a noticeable change in the atmosphere during this time. The subtle movements of the day, wind shifting across slopes, distant sounds carried through the air, begin to settle. Everything feels as though it is slowing, preparing for the calm of night. In places like Annapurna and along the long ridgelines of the Himalayas, evening light can stretch across vast distances, illuminating one section of the mountain while leaving another in shadow. The contrast is soft, never harsh, creating a balance between light and dark that feels natural and unforced. Walking during this time carries a different rhythm. Steps become quieter, movements more deliberate. There is no urgency to reach a destination, only a gentle awareness of the changing light. The body follows the environment, slowing naturally as the day comes to a close. And with that slowing, the mind settles once more. Thoughts become softer, less defined. The steady presence of the mountains, unchanging, unmoving, creates a sense of grounding that remains even as the light fades. There is something deeply calming about this transition. It is not an ending. It is a continuation. A shift from one state to another, carried out with patience and balance. The last light lingers on the horizon, stretching thin across the sky before fading completely. For a brief moment, the mountains exist in a quiet blend of colors, soft purple, pale blue, fading gold, before settling into the cool tones of night. And then, just as gently as it arrived, the day is gone. Chapter 13, The Quiet of Night Above the Clouds. Night in the mountains is unlike night anywhere else. Without the presence of cities, without artificial light, the darkness becomes deeper, clearer, more complete. The sky reveals itself fully, stretching across the peaks with a clarity that feels almost endless. Stars appear gradually. At first, only a few, faint points of light scattered across the sky. Then more, and more, until the entire sky is filled with them, each one steady, unmoving, part of a pattern that feels both distant and immediate at the same time. At high altitude, the atmosphere is thinner, allowing more of this light to reach the surface. The result is a night sky that feels closer, more detailed, more present. The mountains beneath it remain still. Snow reflects a faint glow, enough to reveal outlines of ridges and slopes even in near darkness. Glaciers rest in silence. Valleys lie hidden beneath cloud or shadow, their details softened into quiet shapes. The air is cold, clear, still. Sound carries differently at night. With less movement in the atmosphere, even the smallest noise can travel further. A distant shift of snow, the soft movement of wind across a ridge, the faint rustle of fabric. These sounds remain subtle, but they linger just a little longer. And yet, the overall feeling is one of silence. A complete surrounding stillness. There is no pressure here. No expectation. Only the presence of the night itself. For those resting in this environment, whether inside a shelter or simply pausing along a quiet slope, the experience becomes almost meditative. The steady rhythm of breathing continues, slower now, matching the calm of the surroundings. The mind, already quieted by the day, settles even further. Thoughts drift. Awareness softens. The boundary between observation and rest becomes less distinct. Looking upward, the vastness of the sky creates a sense of perspective that is difficult to find elsewhere. The mountains, immense during the day, now feel part of something even larger, something that extends far beyond the visible world. And yet, there is no overwhelming feeling. Only calm. Only space. Only the quiet understanding that everything continues, even in stillness. Time moves gently here. Hours pass without urgency. The night does not rush toward morning. It simply unfolds. And within that unfolding, there is rest. Deep, uninterrupted rest. Chapter 14, Why the Mountains Feel So Calm. There is a reason the mountains feel different. It is not only their height, or their scale, or the distance they create from the world below. It is something more subtle than that. Something that emerges from the combination of elements that exist here in balance. First, there is space. Open, uninterrupted space that allows both the body and the mind to expand without pressure. There are no crowded environments, no constant movement, no overwhelming detail demanding attention. Instead, there is room to observe, to breathe, to simply be. Then there is rhythm. A natural, unforced rhythm shaped by light, temperature, and the steady cycles of day and night. Nothing moves too quickly. Nothing changes abruptly. Everything unfolds in its own time, allowing awareness to follow without strain. There is also simplicity. The landscape, though vast, is not cluttered. It is refined to its essential elements: rock, snow, sky, air. This simplicity removes distraction, making it easier to focus on what remains. And perhaps most importantly, there is stillness. Not as an absence, but as a presence. A quiet foundation that supports everything else. In places like Mount Everest or the wide, open slopes of Denali, this stillness can be felt even when the wind is moving or the light is shifting. It exists beneath those changes, steady and consistent. The human mind responds to this environment in a natural way. Without constant stimulation, it begins to settle. Without noise, it becomes quieter. Without urgency, it slows. This is why time feels different in the mountains. Not because it changes, but because the way it is experienced changes. Moments become longer, more noticeable, more complete. A single breath, a single step, a single shift of light can feel sufficient in a way that is often overlooked elsewhere. There is also a sense of perspective that emerges in these high places. Looking out across endless ridges and valleys, the scale of the world becomes clear. Individual concerns, which may feel large in other contexts, begin to soften in comparison, not in a way that dismisses them, but in a way that places them within a broader view. And within that view, there is calm. Not forced, not created, simply revealed. The mountains do not add something new. They remove what is unnecessary. They create an environment where what remains is enough. Enough to experience. Enough to feel. Enough to rest within. Chapter 15. The world below, the stillness above. Far beneath the high peaks, life continues as it always has. Cities move with their constant rhythm. Roads carry endless motion. Lights remain on through the night. Conversations overlap, creating a steady background of sound and activity that rarely pauses. From above, all of this feels distant. Not disconnected, but softened by the space between. Clouds often form a natural boundary, separating the world below from the stillness above. Looking down from a high ridge, it is not always possible to see what lies beneath. Instead, there is only a vast layer of white, slowly shifting, hiding the details of daily life from view. And above that layer, the mountains remain. Still, quiet, unchanged. This contrast creates something unique. A sense of dual existence. Two worlds, moving at different speeds, existing side by side. Below, movement. Above, stillness. Below, complexity. Above, simplicity. Neither is better. Neither is more important. They are simply different. And moving between them changes how both are experienced. Time spent in the mountains carries something back with it. Not physically, but in perception. The calm, the slower rhythm, the awareness of space, these do not disappear when the journey ends. They remain, quietly influencing how the world is seen afterward. Even in busy environments, there can be moments where that stillness returns. A pause in conversation. A quiet breath. A moment of awareness that echoes the rhythm of the mountains. This is part of what makes the experience lasting. It is not limited to the place itself. It continues in small ways long after. And perhaps that is the most meaningful aspect of the journey. Not just the time spent above the clouds, but the way it reshapes the sense of time below them. Chapter 16, a world that remains unchanged. The mountains do not change quickly. They are shaped over long periods, by wind, by ice, by the slow movement of the earth itself. Their transformations are measured not in days or years, but in centuries. And yet, to those who visit them, they can feel timeless, unmoving, constant, a place where the pace of the world has slowed enough to be felt in its simplest form. Above the clouds, this feeling becomes even stronger. With fewer distractions, fewer changes, fewer signs of human presence, the environment reveals itself as it is, steady, balanced, complete. There is no need for it to become anything else. No need for it to move faster. No need for it to demand attention. It simply exists. And in that existence, there is something deeply calming. Because in a world that often feels fast, complex, and constantly shifting, the mountains offer something different. A place where time stretches, where space opens, where stillness remains. The journey through this landscape does not end in a single moment. It continues in memory, in awareness, in the quiet understanding that such places exist, even when they are far away. Places where the world slows down. Places where the air feels lighter. Places where the sky feels closer. Places where nothing is missing. And everything is enough. Above the clouds, the mountains remain, unchanged, unhurried, and always waiting in stillness.